Hello everyone. In this lesson we will answer the question, what is an array? So for starters, even outside the context of programming, we might hear a car dealership say that a car is available in a wide array of colors. Okay, so let's think of an array as a collection. Now with that in mind, let's jump right into the code. So here I am in the index.php file that lives in our theme folder. And why don't we go ahead and delete all of this test code from our previous lesson, and let's try something new. So if we think back to that first taste of PHP lesson, you'll remember that we learned how to create a variable. So let's try that again. So I will go into PHP mode. Down here I will close out of PHP mode. And then to create a variable, you just use the $sign. And maybe I want to create a variable that stores my name. So equals Brad. This variable name isn't special. I just made it up. It could be unicorn or pizza. Okay, but the idea here is that I'm setting this variable to have a value of Brad. And now I can use that variable anywhere else on the page. So maybe down here, once I am back in HTML mode, I could create a paragraph that says, hi, my name is, and then maybe drop into PHP mode so I can echo out that my name variable. Okay, and then close out the sentence with a period and then close out the HTML paragraph tag. Okay, so if I save that and test it, hi, my name is Brad. So this is an example of a very simple variable that only contains one single little bit of data, right? Just one single name. However, what if we wanted to store multiple names within a single variable? So that's where arrays come into the picture. So check this out. Let's start over again. So let's go into PHP mode. And let's imagine that I want to create a variable named names, right? Plural. Now the name of the variable doesn't matter. So this could be pizzas. Doesn't matter. I just chose names to try to indicate that I want to store multiple values, right? Plural. So what does our variable equal? Well, we can say array, okay, and now within these parentheses, right after the word array, we can store as many names as we want. So check this out. I could say Brad, comma, John, comma, Jane, comma, meows a lot. You get the idea. I can store as many names as I want. So in PHP, an array is a special type of data. An array is a collection of multiple values. Okay, and let's imagine that down here in HTML mode, I want to access one of these names. So maybe I have an HTML paragraph tag, and I want to say, hi, my name is blank, right? So I would drop into PHP to access our variable. So I want to echo out something that lives in the names variable. Okay, and then to look inside the array or look inside the collection, right here we can use square brackets. On your keyboard, this is directly right of the P key. Okay, now let's say for example that I want to access the first value in this array, so Brad. I would just include a 0 within the square brackets. You might think that it would be a 1 to access the first item, but it's actually a 0. In most programming languages, PHP included, arrays are 0-based, meaning the first item is 0 instead of 1. So for example, if I wanted to access the second value of John, I would include a 1 here. If I wanted Jane, a 2. If I wanted meows a lot, a 3. Okay, so if I save this and refresh, cool, we see my name is meows a lot. If I change it back to a 2, right, so 0, 1, 2, we should see Jane. Cool. But now the question is, why? Why would we do this? Why would we want to store multiple values in a single variable? What is the point of doing this? What is the advantage of doing this? Well, there are several reasons, but probably the biggest reason is for something called looping. So what in the world is looping? What is a loop? Well, let's imagine we want to do something once for each item in this collection. So let's imagine we wanted to output this sentence of hi, my name is blank. We wanted to do that once for each item in the collection. So technically we could just copy and paste this line and have it 4 times and then change this to 0, 1, 2, 3. right? So if I save this, that technically works, but this is terrible code. This is really repetitive, and it's just not an efficient way of doing things. Instead, what we can do is leverage the power of an array and programmatically loop through the collection and do something once for each item. So check this out. Let me show you what I mean. But actually, before we worry about outputting these names, let's just practice a very basic loop first. So let's give ourselves a goal. For whatever reason, let's imagine we want to output a bulleted list on the page that counts to 100. Right? So imagine we want to create an HTML list item in a series of them, something like this that goes 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 100. So it would take a long time to type that out by hand, but programming and loops make that very easy to do. So check this out. Back up here, while we are still in PHP mode, let's use something called a while loop. So while parentheses, and then right after that, curly brackets. Okay, so how does the while loop work? Well, whatever lives within the curly brackets will happen again and again and again until whatever we place in these parentheses evaluates to false. So let me show you what I mean. Right above this while loop, let's create a variable named count. The name doesn't matter, I'm just choosing count. And let's set it to equal 1. Now remember, our goal is to output a bulleted list that counts to 100. So within our parentheses, let's say that as long as the following thing is true, keep looping. So in the parentheses, we'll say, as long as our count is less than 100, keep doing whatever we tell it to do within these curly brackets. So then in the curly brackets, let's just echo out an HTML list item. Okay, and in that list item, we don't want to hard code a value of 1 or 2 or 3. Instead, let's output our count variable. Okay, so we are saying that count begins with a value of 1. So then the first time that the while loop runs, this will echo out a 1. And then right after this line, let's just increment or increase the count variable. So we can say count plus plus, and that will add 1 to it. So 1 plus 1 is 2, so now count equals 2. So then the while loop will run again, and it will say, okay, now the count equals 2. That's still less than 100, so this will evaluate to true. So then this will run again. So then it will output 2, then it will add 1 to that, right? So then count will equal 3, so on and so forth. So this will just keep repeating until finally count will equal 100, and then the while loop will say, hey, 100 is not less than 100. So then this will evaluate to false, and then the while loop will finally end. I know that's a lot to absorb, so you might need to re-watch this a few times, or pause the lesson and experiment with a while loop yourself. But if I save this and refresh, cool, we see a list that counts all the way, actually to 99 instead of 100. So back in our code, let's just change this to less than 101. Cool, so now it counts all the way up to 100. All right, so now that we've seen a relatively simple while loop in action, let's try something a tiny bit trickier. So let's delete the while loop and our count variable, and let's get back to the task at hand. Remember, we want to loop through our array of names and do something once for each item in the collection. So maybe output a sentence that says, hi, my name is blank. All right, so here's how we can do that. Let's use a while loop again. So while parentheses and then curly brackets. Okay, and we are going to need a count variable again. So let's create a variable and name it count. And this time, let's set it to equal 0 instead of 1, right? Because arrays are 0 based. In order to access the first item in the array, we use a 0. Okay, so down in our while loop, within the curly brackets, what we want to do for each item in the collection is just echo out an HTML list item that says, hi, my name is blank. Okay, so we remember from about 5 minutes ago, in order to access one of these items, we just use the variable name, right? They all live in the variable of names. And then to look inside the array, you use square brackets. So to access the first item, it's a 0. To access the second item, it's a 1. Okay, so we don't want to hard code a number here. Instead, we want to use our count variable. So in between the square brackets, let's just say count. Okay, so the first time the loop runs, it will be a 0. And then let's be sure to increment the count. So on the new line, let's say count plus plus. So then the next time the loop runs, count will equal 1. So that will give us John. Then it will increment again to 2, which will give us Jane. You get the idea. So now we just need to tell the while loop how many times it should repeat itself, right? So within these parentheses, we will say as long as the following thing is true. So let's say as long as count is less than, and now you might think that we would just say 4, right? Because there are 4 items in the array. But we don't want to hard code a number here because what if in the future we added a 5th name to the collection? Barks a lot. Okay, so we don't want to have to babysit this code and keep updating this number here. So instead, what we can do is have PHP count the number of items in the array for us. So we'll say as long as count is less than, and then we can use the PHP tool named count, and then open up a pair of parentheses. Okay, and then in those parentheses, we just give it the name of our variable, right? Names is the variable that contains the array. So PHP will automatically count it and say, yep, there are 5 items in the array. So as long as count is less than 5, this will just keep happening again and again and again. So let's save this and refresh. Awesome. Now, if this is not your first time programming and you've worked with arrays before, you might be yelling at the screen right now saying, Brad, why on earth would you use a while loop here when you could have used a for each loop? Well, that's a great question with an even better answer. I want us to be familiar with the while loop because that's what WordPress uses to loop over real content like posts and pages, right? So instead of this hypothetical worthless list of names here, imagine if we had an array or a collection of blog posts and we wanted to loop through those blog posts and display them on the front end of our website for our visitors. Well, that is exactly what we are going to do in our very next lesson. It's probably going to be the most fun we've had in the course so far. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then.